To Relieve the Sanity by Alexander Malec. This story only ever appeared in a collection of the author's tales called Extrapolasis, which was first published in 1967 and had a reissue in 1969. It did get a German translation in 1970, which was republished in 1974. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. To Relieve the Sanity. When the mixed blessing of automation sank its last deep roots into the economy, complaints, other than the already voiced ones of unemployment, union busting, and overproduction, were bound to be many, unique, and unanticipated, and were. Precisely the why of the reason for the immaculate repairman now being ushered into the composing room by Boy Friday of the DeKalb Publishing Company. "Mr. DeKalb? How do you do, sir?" said the one with the toolkit. "My name is Alvin Brown. I'm from the Triple B Corporation." DeKalb gave him his hand and greeted him in return. "Now then, what seems to be the trouble?" "It's the machine," said DeKalb, and pointed, though he may as well not have pointed, for the machine in question almost completely enclosed the room. "Oh, yes, the model SM4200, went the BBB man. "You know damn well it's the SM4200, thought DeKalb, being the only one you make. Then he said, "The usual thing, it doesn't... Right. "Oh, a repair," said Brown of the BBB with surprise, and set down his toolkit. "No, not a repair," said DeKalb, taking in the emissary from the octopoidal company whose initials elsewhere stood for something else. Be darned, he wears a suit of gray. "Oh, it's not a repair," said Brown of the BBB Corporation with some relief. A just so shade of gray, too, thought DeKalb. "And his hair is cut every 2 weeks to the hour, I'll bet," thought DeKalb, who didn't worry too much about haircuts since the betrayed retreat of his own hairline. "Then what could it be?" asked the perfectly groomed repairman. DeKalb took in the short-brimmed hat set square upon the small head of the emissary. All the BBB guys seemed to have small heads. The usual," DeKalb answered. "The novels, they come out, well, how shall I say, too slick. Bet he's even got an umbrella tucked about him somewhere." "Oh," said the other in perplexity, as if to say, what could be wrong with slick? "And you want it changed?" "Of course," said DeKalb. "Just visualize this guy wearing a hat at a jaunty angle, or any cap, hard hat or space helmet for that matter, at a jaunty angle." "How changed?" asked Brown of Triple B, a small note of condescension in his tone. He looked a moment at the eye-tinted green crackle finish of the serpent-like SM4200 novel-writing computer, coiled about the room, between jobs, humming almost inaudibly. "Are there any flaws with this machine's work?" asked Brown. "Bet this guy would even wear a beret square on his head. He'd find a way." No, and that's just the trouble," said DeKalb. "Imagine this guy allowing a strand of hair to flop over his forehead. My God, that would be so unconventional." "Mr. DeKalb," said the repairman from Triple B, removing his coat and hanging up same, "we can only fix what is broken. We can only adjust from a near bad to a near perfect condition. Am I to understand this machine is running perfectly?" "Yes," said DeKalb. "Oh my God, every hair is in place." Brown looked frustrated at the answer. "Yes?" Furrows, perplexity. Vertical lines formed on the forehead in the region above the nose. Perhaps, then, what would you have me do? Grammar yet, thought DeKalb. Even his grammar is set square upon his head. Well, he began, make the thing right more human. Human? His unspoken thought also said, a perfect machine, right? Gah, human. Is that so impossible? Asked DeKalb, still busy with his analysis. They must cut those faces from cookie cutters. How else could they be the same? Wonder if I got my haircuts on time and wore my suits just so gray, would my universe stay in order? Thought DeKalb, to whom nothing seemed to stand still, the status quo a condition of only the more fortunate, to whom life was a constant round of unpredictables, who had failed in business 3 times. It is quite out of the question, but before we go on, let me ask you something personal, Mr. DeKalb. Shoot. Brown made a slight frown at the shoot. Mr. DeKalb, is business good? Yes and no. I'm afraid I don't understand. Well, I write good enough novels, rather the monster does, and I sell enough novels. Brown had winced at the word monster. Thing is, so does my competition. DeKalb decided on a little needle. Now, if I had the only model SM4200 in existence... With a blandness to make DeKalb boil, the BBB man said, There's room for everybody, Mr. DeKalb. Of all the facetious... thought DeKalb, and continued to drive the needle. And if I didn't have to pay so much rent... Mr. Brown sat down on the desk belonging to the DeKalb Publishing Company and looked about the walls and ceiling more in sympathy than anything else. Well, it is a rather nice building. I'm not talking about the building. He allowed his voice to get a little harsh. I'm talking about the exorbitant rental you people charge me for, the machine, for that monster there. Brown looked at him straight in the face with eyes that brought from DeKalb the thought, they're impersonal eyes, they're calculating eyes, they're unimaginative eyes. We can always remove the computer, the eyes said. DeKalb wore a stubble of beard and a twine of hair over one eyebrow, much in the manner of those who endure a day-to-day hand-to-hand struggle to keep ahead of creditors, to reach the break-even point, what with the high rental, in novel sales, and simultaneously try to maintain a split-level white elephant, a wife full of aches and pains, a leaky suburban swimming pool, and a young, comely, urban, red-headed mistress. He loved life so much he could taste it, and this, thus far, was the best means he knew of to satisfy this taste. I'm not complaining that it's here, he said by way of apology, and remembered things really were rougher with a human staff, readers, editors, printers, maintenance men, stock boys, and the usual agitators. Now, the existence of SM4200 eliminated all that, and therefore all annoyances, gripes, and curses were now implemented in the person of Mr. Alvin Brown, impersonal pseudopod of the BBB Corporation. I just want to do better than the competitors. Mr. Brown looked almost amused. It's the same machine, Mr. DeKalb, he explained. Well, can't you do something to it? The other face asked, Like what? To make it right, a little more human? You've said that before, Mr. DeKalb, said the immaculate, logical, unimaginative Mr. Brown. In all honesty, I wouldn't know where to start. DeKalb took out a cigar. It was a butt of a cigar, since he had smoked the first half at dinner, and lit it. Maybe the guy doesn't like cigars, thought DeKalb, and said, Well, I guess that's it, but I really shouldn't complain, though. I mean, considering what the machine can do. Brown made an expression of assent. It's just that one would like something extra. Brown frowned. Oh, but it's a wonderful machine, though. Otherwise, a live author would be in quite a bind to look up information this thing is instantly available. Like, for instance, the memory circuits for locale. Brown made another expression of assent. You pull a stud for Antarctica, and you get it, complete to the specific gravity of ice in Marie Birdland. And you can feed this information in lumps throughout the novel or space it out gradually so it doesn't interfere with dialogue or slow the plot. And the characterization is, what can I say, full, rich. Quasimodo types complete with mole, super scientist complete with megalomania. And the motivation of each character. DeKalb allowed a little admiration in his tone. How is this done? Brown, somewhat pleased, clasped his hands around one knee and smiled knowingly. The motivation circuits are really what made the SM4200 possible, Mr. DeKalb. Oversimplified, it's something like this. You see, a group of positive-going and negative-going pulses are sent in parallel from the motivation circuit, which, borrowed from the human nomenclature, is called a ganglia. These pulses are reduced to represent in a human being fear and desire, and each ganglia is a human being. Now, a few of these ganglia, say 10, 12, in the computer, are activated to head for a few targets, colloquially known as women, money, power, avoidance of debt, pain, and death. Between these are set up a few mechanical obstacles like oceans, the vacuum of space, secret police, mountains, and so forth. These are also activated. When the machine is turned on, all the circuits act and react. The negative and positive going pulses, gating, buffering, flip-flopping, and canceling until you have literally a diagram of continuity in circuitry. DeKalb blinked. You call this diagram a plot. The plot thereafter will remain intact and active in the machine, except when deviated according to the forces of character. Narrative, locale, and background also come into play, and to some extent will bend the plot. The interaction of all these, forces will produce a novel. Brown was silent a moment. This is for a chronological novel, you understand? Now, if you wanted flashback... DeKalb was holding up his hand in cease and desist. And you can't... Mr. DeKalb, said Brown with great patience, you have read in your operation manual about the memory drums? This guy wants to talk, thought DeKalb, and answered, Of course. He had seen diagrams of the memory drums many times, and they filled him with awe. The memory drum of the SM4200, began Brown, has a vocabulary of 20,000 words, which is quite a lot of words. 20,000 words. That is all we could fit. DeKalb took this in. To get all these words on a memory drum is rather involved. The machine, as you know, can only see a 1 or a 0. That is all it can see. Now, the way the 1s or 0s happen to fall in a 10-column pattern will indicate a letter. The way these letters fall in parallel in other columns will indicate a word. A word like cat, for instance, would take 18 ones to make up. And this word, along with about 20,000 others, each take up a small niche on the memory drum. Brown looked at DeKalb to see how he was taking it. DeKalb understood. The drum, incidentally, is surfaced with magnetized tape, like your present-day tape recorders. All right, so we have all these words stashed away. He said stashed away, thought DeKalb. But suppose we come to a phrase, a sentence like, The black cat chased the fat rat. DeKalb smiled. I know, said Brown, and managed a grin. Our instructor, kind of a wag. DeKalb took a long draught of cigar. This guy really knows his onions, he mused. To make up this sentence, we have to get the words out of the memory drum in the right order. Each word in the drum has an address, and the reading heads will take the word out of the drum and the address running opposite. As each word is taken out of memory, it's sent on to the thyrotrons and is then printed. Don't you lose the word? I mean, once you take it off the drum? No, just like a song you play over and over off a tape recorder isn't lost. Ah, would you like to hear more? DeKalb nodded and chomped on his cigar. Now, this is just one phrase, and it could only have been said by one person with one kind of motivation. We call this motivation keying, not to confuse with the other, plot motivation. This sentence I just gave you has a key. To DeKalb's look, he said, Honestly now. Oh. He looked around. Do you have a book around here written on the SM-4200? DeKalb nodded and walked around to his desk and extracted a soft-cover copy of Gauntlet at Grange Mountain. He handed it to Brown and sat down at his desk chair. Brown leafed through it. You write this? DeKalb nodded. Title, too? About the only thing the machine can't do, said DeKalb and grinned. The title. That was pure creativity, he had to admit. Brown held the book open and asked, How many sentences do you think are in the whole book? Haven't the faintest idea, said DeKalb, eyes faintly squinted in interest. About 2,000, answered Brown, though a lot of sentences are repetitious. Nevertheless, quite a few, wouldn't you say? I'd say. As we talked about a second ago, each sentence has a key, and each character is assigned a certain number of keys, according to his character. Now, when something happens to a character, whether he's made love to, asks for a handout, or bangs his hand with a hammer, he will say something appropriate. Literally, a key is depressed. Are you trying to say that each character in a novel is assigned and indexed in advance a speaking vocabulary of all the things he might say? That is correct. Every character. Every character. DeKalb let this sink in. The manual is an inch thick, you know, he said as an excuse. Say, where do those keys come from? From another memory drum. So the keys from one drum tell the other drum what to say? That is correct. When do the keys work? When it is activated from the key before it. DeKalb shook his head. Sorry, he apologized. You see, explained Brown, a character says something to another character. Now, depending upon this character and upon what is said, another key will actuate and bring a response, a sentence from the word drum. The sentence from the word drum will cause the first character to respond according to his own character and actuate the other's key to bring out a sentence which will in turn actuate the other. It can go on and on. Chain reaction, almost, said DeKalb. Not quite, Brown corrected. If some toughie, that's character, you know, told you to shut up, and if you were small and a coward, well, that's character too, you know, what would you do? Shut up, I guess. So, you see, conversations do stop. DeKalb shook his head. All that to write a couple lines of dialogue. All that, confirmed Brown, and more. There's event keying and timing keying and narrative keying, all tied in together. DeKalb shook his head. All you people taught me how to do was to operate the thing. Every circuit is trying to get words down on paper, said Brown, as if the other hadn't spoken at all. All at the same time. Dialogue, action, background. and only one of these keying circuits gets to write at a time. When that one's finished, circuits flip-flop and the next set of words are ready to be put on paper. Almost beyond human comprehension, said DeKalb. Beyond most human comprehension, said Brown, spreading a little. Yet, what happens in an instant of time is very simple. An electric current has a way to go, and only one way to go through a matrix of magnetic amplifiers and transistors that either block or allow it to go through. Brown had an instantaneous pang, wondering if maybe he wasn't talking too much. An interesting case we had in school. The instructor gave us each a sheaf of logical diagrams of the machine, all the circuits tripped and ready to write a novel. Then he would point to a keying circuit and say that it was set up in such and such a way, and ask us, with such a key here, what would Jack Armstrong be saying here, 1,000 words later? Brown laxed quiet. What took us 2 months, the machine did in 6 minutes. DeKalb waited, but no more words were forthcoming. He spoke. I guess you can't help me. I wouldn't know where to start, Mr. DeKalb. Thought DeKalb. I could like this guy, if I liked him. Mind if I smoke? Asked Brown. No, go ahead, said the other, and chomped on his cigar, deep in thought. But it doesn't answer the question. Why can't the machine write like a human author? I was getting to that, answered Brown. Why? Because, for one, a human author is inconsistent. He said this in a tone that implied that he was glad he wasn't thus afflicted, and therefore would introduce inconsistency in the characters. In other words, they'd behave once in a while out of character, whereas the machine's characters would always be consistent and predictable, as it was built to be, said Brown. Secondly, a human author thinks illogically, and consequently his stories have an illogical ring to them. You mean the human touch, don't you? Yes, that's the word. The machine couldn't write illogically. It wouldn't know how. Only humans. Humans are sick, said Brown, and then began an inkling in DeKalb of the knowledge that the SM-4200 and Alvin Brown were only separate pseudopods from the same parent mass. Can't understand it, said DeKalb. The machine writes so flawlessly. The background is complete, the characterization is rich, the motivation's plausible, slick and flawless, and yet, you know. That a machine wrote it? No, not quite what I wanted to say. No, I meant it'll never be great literature. DeKalb dropped an inch of ash. Do you have an explanation? Of a sort, yes. Go ahead, then. The machine is a putter together of electronic impulses. Everything that it does, it was programmed to do. Of its own point of view, it injected nothing. Brown removed one shoe and casually, contentedly, scratched his toes. Be damned, thought DeKalb. The guy does have some humanity. A person like Hemingway now is forever injecting the business of being gored by a bull or being shot by some loyalist soldier into his stories. A machine cannot do that. Brown stopped talking for a second, as if to collect his thoughts. A person like Dostoevsky now, with his bad liver, homely and persecuted, never did let you forget it when you read his stories. Not like our machine, huh? Said DeKalb flippantly, looking over at the beautiful machine which simply hummed, its multicolored lights giving a display reminiscent of Christmas. Brown didn't go for that remark, but he didn't break stride. Steinbeck loved people, but he hated certain types of authority. Bradbury was the same way. Dostoevsky spent some time in Siberia and always afterward had a grudge against the czars. You know quite a bit about this. Part of the course. Motivation of characters, you know. Motivation of authors, that's something else. The machine doesn't have motivations. That's the difference. Brown put his shoe back on. My goodness, how long have we been talking? So you can't put this motivation in a machine. Not saying can't, just don't know how. Pain is motivation, you know? Yes, I did know, said DeKalb, wishing he could forget certain parts of his life. Maybe that answers our question about the machine, said Brown, and got up. What? Oh, said DeKalb. A person with a completely happy childhood. Brown's back was to DeKalb as he spoke. That person will never be a great author. DeKalb was surprised at the other's knowledge. You picked up quite a bit of reading in that school. Had to read, part of the course. You don't like to read? No, sir, I do not. Then you don't like to write either. Right, he said in surprise. Who, he enunciated carefully, would want to write? But all you know about plot, character, motivations, you'd make a fairly good author. I know, said Brown simply, but I have not the slightest inclination to write. I think I'll be going, he said, and made for the hat rack. Donning his outdoor gear, he returned and said to DeKalb, Would you like to know something? DeKalb said, Sure, and got up too. The urge to write is not a healthy urge, is not a normal urge. A bit of madness to it, you might say. Ever read James Jones? He said the writing urge was nothing more than a useful byproduct of a traumatic mind. Traumatic mind? Yes, you've got to have some kind of trauma before you can be an author. You're trying to overcome or to philosophize away or to forget that open wound which is a bleeding trauma, an unrecovered from experience in childhood, sort of like an axe to grind. He said this with the superiority of a man who knows childhood disasters can be avoided. Trauma. DeKalb repeated the word to himself. As an editor of the old flesh-and-blood author era, he had heard the word many times, but never appreciated the significance of it till now. Accompanying the man from BBB to the door, he said aloud, the other paying no mind, The machine is slick and sane. Maybe it could use a little madness to relieve the sanity. Brown leaned over and picked up his toolkit. Extracting a plastic raincoat, he commenced to get into it. Forecast, he said. DeKalb said, I must say you surprised me a bit, Mr. Brown. I haven't had a conversation like this since I used to interview authors. Imagine, a thing like a trauma makes a writer. Brown had other things on his mind, probably the next call. It was obvious the conversation didn't move him as much as DeKalb. Be around in a couple of months to see how things are going. I'll see you then, Mr. DeKalb. Aren't you going to check the machine? Well, you did say there's nothing wrong with its output, and... He looked over. All your indicator lights show everything's all right. You're very sure of yourself, said DeKalb. I mean, out of thousands of transistors... Not a chance, interrupted Brown. Not the way we build them. And even if a transistor did blow on you, the machine has secondary circuits built in to do the job. What would happen if the secondary circuits blew out? Brown looked at him with patience. The probability of two components, primary and secondary, of the same circuit blowing out in sequence is about your chances of winning the Irish sweepstakes. DeKalb didn't answer. And even if that did happen, the machine can to some extent repair itself. And if it can't do that, to arrange a bypass. I really do have to make some more stops, Mr. DeKalb. They said their goodbyes, and once more DeKalb was alone with the machine. It was later on in the day that his boy Friday popped into the composing room, and knowing almost as much about the machine as his employer, knew the SM 4200 was busy composing a novel. Looking at the varying rainbow of blinking console lights, he said, "She doesn't look right, boss." "I know," said DeKalb, surreptitiously quiet, a grin on his face a mile wide. "She doesn't smell right either," said the boy Friday. "I know," said DeKalb absently. "Circuits bypassing, probably." "Another mistress," gleamed the thought through his eyes. "She'll have green hair to go with the green rugs." "It doesn't sound right either," said the boy, and headed for the output of the machine. "It is suffering," said DeKalb, and wrung his hands with the forecast. "Her name will be Cheetah." "Boss!" The inflection had a lot in it. "Ah, Riviera. Ah, Monaco," went the foretasting DeKalb, and actually smacked his lips. "Boss! The writing! It's terrific!" "I know," said DeKalb, his voice already softened by paradise. "Boss!" Again, the inflection had a lot in it. "Oh, God!" Pure anguish. I'll get it out. I'll leave it be." "But, boss," "I said leave it be." "But, boss, somebody drove a fire axe into the machine." "I know," said DeKalb, and his eyes gleamed at the wealth soon to be. "I have just given the machine a trauma." You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.